if you understand the value of multi-touch attribution and you understand the value of looking at it from efficiency standpoint or seeing how efficient your channels are at contributing to a closed deal, then you get it, and you probably are a little bit further when it comes to your data and your tools.
It's Attribution Nation time, where we look at attribution from multiple angles in a unique mini-series format. You're in the trenches with me for the next 5 episodes, talking to attribution practitioners. Let's go. On today's episode of Attribution Nation, we are talking to Sy Spencer, who is currently managing marketing data and analytics at Cisco. And Sy has a really, really interesting background and is doing some great work in attribution. We'll go a lot more into Sy's background as we dive into the topics. So Sy, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So Sy, you got your start in data analytics and strategy on the B2C side with Cartoon Network and Warner Brothers, which is super, super interesting, by the way. So tell us a little bit about how you got into that to begin with.
It's an interesting story. And the short version of the story is I was in Los Angeles. I was living there at the time. I was in grad school, and my brothers were child actors. And I had industry friends and industry partner. I was dating someone that was a director. And I utilized some of my industry contacts to find a home for me. I did not think that my home was in front of the camera like my brothers. I wanted to be somewhere behind the camera. And I passed a lot of studios and studio lots living in Burbank in the LA area. And I ended up landing interviews at Disney and some of these studios. And that was a launch pad for me applying to Turner, Warner, suite of brands. And I got interviews in LA, and I got interviews in Georgia. And I actually accepted a role at Cartoon Network while I was living in LA. So I had to relocate fairly quickly. And that wasn't hard for me because I had already lived in Georgia before. So I relocated to Georgia and started my job at Cartoon Network, where I stayed with Warner Brothers for 13 years.
Wow. And look, now you're in front of the camera, right?
Yes, in front of the camera now today.
Eventually, that's such a cool story. That's such a cool story. I didn't know that like acting was in your family there, and that's how you kind of got in that. That's really cool. So what kind of data work were you doing at Cartoon Network and Warner Brothers?
Absolutely. So I started off with subscription game services. So the subscription games had a lot of data that needed to be analyzed, especially around the levels at which people were getting fatigued. So I worked a lot with the product teams to tell them where at which the players were starting to bail on the game. Where were they no longer logging in? Where were they spending a substantial amount of time? And we would look at analyses around what long lengths of time were good versus long lengths of time that were causing people to churn out of the service. So churn analysis around gameplay within Cartoon Network was one of my biggest roles. And then we segued that into dashboards and talking to leaders about how do we take these games and move them to the next level. So my roles around the Warner Brothers brands, because I moved from Cartoon Network to working with Adult Swim, Turner Classic Movies, and Filmstrucks, they were all really around their startups and their subscription businesses and looking at customer actions and how do we leverage those actions, especially the ones that show that people like what we're doing, so that we can go out and do more of those, go out and buy content that looks like the content that our existing customers are consuming, and then do less of the things that they don't like. So I was always the voice of the consumer, and I was always the one that had to go and demystify for the people that came that wanted to work in entertainment. And that was always my sweet spot, because you don't get a career at Warner Brothers wanting to work with a data person. You got a career at Warner Brothers because you wanted to work in entertainment. So I had to completely learn how to entertain, storytell, demystify, and be the voice of the consumer in that role. So that's where I got my start in B2C analytics.
I love the terms that you used, demystify and voice of the customer or voice of the consumer, because in analytics, that's really what you're doing is you're demystifying what's working and what's not working, which is just under a fog of uncertainty. And then you are also being the voice of the consumer and saying, hey, when you market with this message, I don't like it. When you market with this message, I do like it. So I love those two terms, and I'm going to have to steal them from you. I will credit you, of course, but I'm don't be surprised if you don't see me start using those terms. I really like those terms.
Absolutely.
So then you decided to switch to the dark side of B2B marketing, and you moved over to a company called New Relic. What made you decide to get out of B2C and entertainment and move over to B2B?
Well, after 13 years, the choice was kind of made for me at the very beginning of the pandemic, even before the pandemic was officially a thing. Before March of 2020, I accepted a package from Warner, from that space, that provided me confidence to go out of my comfort zone and start to look for roles that was completely different from what I was doing. So I took this package and I immediately started to look for roles in a different space. And I ended up in B2B. So I went from subscription businesses and entertainment to Kubernetes. It was just like the funniest transition. But I went over to New Relic and I'm working over in, like I said, working with Kubernetes, working with high tech businesses. And I'm remote for the first time in my life because at this point, the pandemic had set in. I did not understand what this remote life was like. Getting to work from home in my previous world one day out of 6 months was like a big deal. So now here I am full-time, remote, B2B, and the share of wallet in the B2B space is completely different. Salaries are completely different. The way we market, the tools we use are different. So I shook things up for myself. And it was great because after over a dozen years doing something quite similar, I could do my job in my sleep. So I had to reinvent myself and learn CRMs. I had to really get good in Salesforce. I had to learn these new terms related to technology and security and hybrid spaces. And I loved it. I loved it a lot. And I saw where the marketing and touch points in the consumer journey, it had some similarities, but it was so different. And it was a space for me and a lot of gaps that I could fill. My issue in B2B was seeing the 1,000 things that I could do and change and not trying to take them all on. So I had to find some space for myself and stay in that lane and not get paralysis. It was just so much work and so many different areas that I found that I could thrive. And I'll pause because I know I'm saying a lot in a second, but I hit a gold mine in B2B because I was starting to hit a stump in B2C where in analytics, my leaders kept saying, Sai, you're doing so great in this area. We got to find something else for you to do so you can grow past, data analytics, data science, dashboarding, visualizations. We need you to get in leadership. And in B2B, there's so many different avenues for me. In my opinion, it was easier for me to transition into more leadership roles. So I loved this move and I loved the opportunity that was put in front of me.
So you come from B2C to B2B where you have to suddenly learn all new systems and all new terms and all new concepts. How did you get up to speed so quickly? I mean, you don't have a lot of time in our world today. You don't have a lot of time to make these transitions, right? So how did you get up to speed so quickly and learn Salesforce so quickly that you were able to make an impact, pretty quickly in your transition?
I think, and this is going to sound odd, for lack of a better word, I'm going to say empathy. And I think that's why having so much diversity in the workforce helps. Empathy helped me transition from B2B to B2C. And I'll give you an example. Using, like what you mentioned, Salesforce CRM, I had to use empathy to understand that system. I look at that system as the system of record for sales. It's the Rolodex for sales. It's their journal. It's where they hold the people they talk to, their receipts, all of their homework, all of the deals they need to close. It's the way that they feed their family. And when I look at that system with that empathy and I isolate that system by the different sections and the way that sales uses it, it helps me to learn that system. So I know it's broken out by these are the receipts. These are all the opportunities to make money. Here are all the people in my Rolodex, all the folks I want to contact, and here are all the people that could potentially become contacts. They could lead into a contact, and literally these are the names of the objects inside of Salesforce. So using that empathy, I started to learn that system, and I use that same thought process for a lot of the other systems in B2B. And I learned it, and it didn't make the transition as hard. And sometimes when I'm working with my coworkers, I try to explain it to them using these analogies because some of these systems are intimidating and they've worked around these systems for years and never wanted to touch them because they thought it was just not something digestible or palatable for them to learn. But when we simplify the system and look at it with empathy, it doesn't have to be the scary system that we all make it to be.
I love that. I think you're probably the first person that we've interviewed in this podcast who's mentioned empathy as a way to learn something. So that's definitely a unique approach that you have there. And just for the Gen Zs that might be listening to the podcast, a Rolodex is an old analog system that we used to put business cards and contact cards in, and it was alphabetized and you could roll through it. So just in case anybody doesn't understand what that is.
I'm dating myself.
Yeah, I mean, I remember those too. I use those myself. So yeah. Now, one of the things that had to be difficult for you as well is learning the different customer journey between B2C and B2B, because B2C, it is a lot more rapid. You don't have, 20, 50, 100 touches to get somebody to download a game app. It's usually 2, 3, if that. And it's such a different customer journey with buying committees and things like that. How did you learn that?
That was a large transition, is what you said is true. In B2C, our goal was the fewest clicks to entry as possible. We wanted to get someone to the call to action in fewer than 2 clicks. How do we do that? How do we make the ads as impactful as possible? How does the landing page cut to the chase? Well, in B2B, that's too much. That's like talking about marriage on the first date. We can't get you right to the form that is going to put you into a trial on an ad the first time we saw you. So understanding that you can't talk to a customer so abrupt in B2B helped me to understand that the journey is going to be longer, and understanding that not one person at a company is going to be responsible for this $1 million deal. It's just not sound to think that there's just this one human at this company that's going to close this deal out. It's going to take an entire small team at a company to get this deal closed, and it could take a year, it could take years. So again, I'm going back to empathy, putting myself in the shoes of a company that wants to purchase from us and thinking through what it's going to take to really close that deal. It made sense to me that these journeys are going to be longer. They're going to include more people. They're going to be complicated. They're not going to look like we expect them to look. They're not going to look like a B2C's journey. And I went into my journey and pathway analysis with that in mind. So when I saw the journeys, the common paths and the paths that people were taking at the brands that I work for now, I was not shocked. And it was so interesting because I worked with my colleagues on some of these journey and path analysis, and the paths upset them. They were like, something's wrong. We need to go back and retool. And I would just chuckle inside because I went in to this analysis knowing that these paths were not going to look typical. And they went in thinking that if the path bounced around a little bit, we probably need to go back to the drawing board and retool. Something's wrong. And it just showed that, I had to probably explain that, yes, we let's go look and make sure everything is set up correctly and the data flow is right and our integrations are best practice. But we can't predict the way our consumers are shopping because we are looking at a committee of 8 to 10 people over a span of a year or more. And, they could be shopping for one or two pieces of our technology to suit several use cases. So talking in a story about how people shop tends to help me understand journeys.
So a couple of things I just want to chime in on that is I think there's a couple of interesting concepts you mentioned there. Number one is the idea of checking your bias, because it sounds like a lot of people had some bias in the way that they thought about buying processes, and that you have to take that out of the equation and just understand what's really happening instead of a biased viewpoint of what's happening. The other thing that you talked about is how buying journeys are not linear. And it's not a problem if two different buyers have completely different journeys. You can't force a buyer to buy something the way you want them to buy it. You have to meet them where they are, and you have to give them flexibility. The last one that really resonated with me is you mentioned asking somebody to sign up for a demo the very first time you've interacted with them, excuse me, is like asking for marriage on the first date. It made me think of like B2B buying as more of like a courtship. Like you have to like meet the parents, you have to get to know their friends, and it takes time. And it's the way you mentioned that just made me think of B2B buying as a courtship, which I think is kind of an interesting way of thinking of that.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So once you went over to the B2B side, you got your start with B2B marketing attribution, and specifically Marketo Measure when you went over to, and I know I'm gonna butcher the name of the company, Meraki?
Meraki. Yes, Meraki.
Meraki. Okay, sorry, Meraki. Sorry, Meraki folks. So you got your start with Marketo Measure when you went to Meraki, and you had gotten recruited to Meraki by people that you worked with at New Relic. So how did you make that transition from New Relic over to Meraki, and then starting to use Marketo Measure?
Yes, at New Relic, we became really close. We actually transitioned between marketing operations and data science team, really small team, and we did both functions of data science and marketing operations. And I actually love that we sat so closely together, and sometimes my role was interchangeable. Not only would I show the problems and show the successes and dashboards, we would also go fix things too. So I like that a lot. So some of my team members went over and accepted roles at Meraki, several of them, more than 3. When they went over there and Meraki was saying, we just need a couple more people and we need this, that, and the other. And they kept saying, you gotta call Cy. You have to call Cy. By the time I interviewed, they were like, we just keep hearing about you. So they were saying, hey, the thing we did over at New Relic, you got to come do it at Meraki. So at this time, we were rinse and repeating our same process of ensuring data flow across systems were standard, ensuring our tagging and tracking were just so, removing hard-coded tags off the website, making sure our email service provider was connected to our CRM, making sure that end-to-end, those touch point journeys, that we can grab someone from first touch all the way through a closed won deal. That rinse and repeat that we did, the team was like, come on over, let's do the same thing. They need the same thing. So I came in and I already had my mind set that we were going to go and perform the same duties in the same functions that we did over at New Relic. And I had to learn the, Meraki landscape, or learn some of the nuances of their systems. We made some tweaks to some of the things that we did. And that helped me to transition over into the Meraki space. And of course, Cisco owns Meraki.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, when you went to Meraki, did they already have Marketo Measure at the time, or was that something that you added on after you got there?
They had Marketo Measure, and it's interesting you asked that, because with me taking over Marketo Measure at several companies, I've found a theme. Marketo Measure was always already there every time I've gone in and taken over and become the owner of Marketo Measure. And what I've seen is when you become the owner of Marketo Measure, you really need to understand CRMs, customer journeys, buying committees, and big data. And it would be nice if you knew how to query that data and you knew how to go into Marketo Measure and fine tune based on what the data is showing, because sometimes you have to go and tune and dial up and dial down the settings. Now, I'm speaking on the original product. They have changed it so much in Marketo Measure Ultimate and when you go into AEM, but I'm talking about the original version of Marketo Measure that they bought from Visible. And with that being said, Meraki had launched it and they brought me in to take over it and do a relaunch of sorts. So with that, I had to do my rinse and repeat of making sure all the integrations were just so, adding integrations that were missing, looking at the efficacy of all the data, seeing how covered we were with touch points across all of our marketing channels, making sure I sat with the channel owners and I knew all of their use cases and needs, making sure that they knew how to self-serve within the Marketo Measure platform, and then just following some of the touch point journeys end to end within Marketo Measure to make sure it was capturing all the milestone journeys, and then fine-tuning some of the weighting for the attribution. So once I was able to do all of that, we were ready for this relaunch over at Meraki. And doing that, Cisco heard about me. So that's what led to where I am now.
Okay. All right. I got questions about how this all went down. So how different was it for you to go from New Relic, who didn't have Marketo Measure, to Meraki, who had Marketo Measure? Were some of the, because you talked about rinse and repeat, some of the same strategies and tactics and methodologies. How much did you have to change your tactics, strategies, and methodologies moving over to Meraki, when they had Marketo Measure? Was it 50% different, 25% different? Like how much change did you have to make there to accommodate having this new platform?
It was a lot easier to me to transition over to Meraki since they had it, because once you have a tool like this, that means you get it. That means you understand you want to take a customer's touch and use that touch sort of as if that touch point contributes to commission on the overall deal in the end. And if you understand the value of multi-touch attribution and you understand the value of looking at it from efficiency standpoint, or seeing how efficient your channels are at contributing to a closed deal, then you get it, and you probably are a little bit further when it comes to your data and your tools. So to me, it wasn't the hardest transition to come over to Meraki. One of the harder things that we did have is the CRM and how our CRM is set up, and some of the ways that the CRM is used or not used, because we didn't necessarily in our group own all of the objects in the CRM. That's the responsibility of sales and another team. So there are things that we could not control that could be handled differently to work better with Marketo Measure tools. So I did not have a lot of control over things that I needed changed, or I would like to be done a little bit differently to make Marketo Measure work best.
So then the other question I had is related to how you did this relaunch. So you had to go through this whole process of kind of like almost re-implementing Marketo Measure. How did you manage that relaunch? Because it's a lot of coordination with like channel managers and different departments, and then also change management on the back end, which is, or on the down funnel, where you have to retrain people in how to talk about metrics, and you're going to change some lingo and some words, and where do you even go to find your reports? Like, how did you manage that whole kind of relaunch process? It's complicated. It's a lot of coordination.
It is. And it goes back to a word we used when we were talking about B2C, is a lot of demystifying. So we had to start off with education. And there's a difference in last touch and multi-touch. So we had to show a before and after quite a bit of how you currently view your data and how you will be viewing data with this relaunch of Marketo Measure. So I would do these kind of eye charts of here's what you have now, here's where we're moving to. So just kind of like the habits of seven, one of the seven habits of highly effective people is beginning with the end in mind. I would have to show the marketers where we're going. And once they saw these great insights from multi-touch attribution, that gave them the incentive to work with us to help make sure we kept all of their marketing tools plugged into Marketo Measure. We kept the logins live and provisioned. We understood whenever they changed agencies. We work with them to make sure they use the right query string parameters, and we help to build link builder tools for them. So end to end, from campaign activation all the way through the end of the campaign, they were incentivized to work with us because we were able to spell out what multi-touch attribution was going to bring to the table for them and show them from the beginning what a completed multi-touch attribution report would look like. We also needed to break down a journey for them to show them just how complex a journey looks in our space. So they were being educated on something while they had worked for Meraki for a while they hadn't seen. So they were like, wow, I was always interested in our journeys, and I'd never seen that before. I've never seen it look like this. And once you're showing this and you're showing that, we're here to give you this information and we can help augment what you're already out doing in the market with this data, that's going to get your stakeholders to partner with you and share with you and come to you whenever things change and whenever they have needs. And when you get that close partnership and you get that understanding unlocked, that's what, to me, it takes to get multi-touch attribution adopted and to get a lot of allies on your side to start to work with you and use the information that you put out.
So a lot of education, a lot of change management is really the two biggest things that you had to do to get it relaunched. And then, you mentioned that you kind of made a name for yourself, and Cisco got wind of Sy and said, Sy, you're working for the mothership now. What was that like?
Yeah, it was like you're voluntold that you're leaving Meraki and coming over to Cisco. That's just how we do things. So I said, okay, where do I start? So I transitioned over. It was pretty black and white. I transitioned over into Cisco, who owns Meraki, doing exactly the same work under the marketing operations team, owning Marketo Measure. But what is interesting is we took a step back and we decided that there was something else that was needed, even larger right now, than trying to relaunch Marketo Measure, because they came into the same scenario where the Marketo Measure owner had left and the tool needed to be relaunched. Well, I looked inside of our system of record for sales, and of course, there's an ability to launch a campaign right from the same tool that sales use to house their contacts and to house their opportunities. But we were not utilizing the campaign to the full. We were actually spitting off thousands, hundreds of thousands, even 1 million campaigns inside of our system of record for sales. But those campaigns were shells. They had no campaign membership. They had no campaign membership responses or actions or status updates. We were not using the campaigns in this tool the way they should. And Marketo Measure thrived, this version of it thrived on the CRM being set up in such a way that that campaign object would have been used a little bit, cleaner, where you have some kind of ID that flows between your systems that's consistent and that is recognized by your query string parameter, your email service provider, your marketing automation tools, and your CRM. And we didn't necessarily have that at Cisco because we've used various different IDs through the years. So tagging and tracking and the campaign being used consistently in the system of record and sales became my biggest project. And that's just really a big part of my day now, is getting that object cleansed. So we need to go back in time, take out a lot of these campaigns that are shells, get rid of them, and start a new process and new governance and automate these campaigns, automate membership of these campaigns, automate the responses and actions and motions of the people who are on these campaigns so that changes. And that gets us closer to the opportunity, because now when your campaign is right in the system of record for sales, the campaign can talk to the opportunity better. So that's what I'm focused on right now. And then I can move my focus back to Marketo Measure.
And now you became the owner of campaigns and campaign members inside Salesforce, which is huge. I don't think, in case any of our listeners don't quite understand how big that is a Salesforce administrative team saying, we're going to cede ownership of these two objects to somebody that doesn't sit on our team. That never happens. So how the hell did you navigate the process of becoming the owner of two objects in Salesforce?
Yeah, it's interesting. And I didn't know how big it was when I was granted the privilege. I had no clue. And when I saw the email come across and it was announced by our leaders, I just didn't feel it until now. I sit on daily scrums and there's a team that helps. And when sales comes to me and they're saying, hey, we want to use the object too, but we want to use it in a way that works with what you're trying to do and with your business requirements. And I'm like, wait, sales comes to marketing to make sure that they are complying with our needs for the use of an object and a tool they own. It's just so interesting. But we're just trying to do what's best for Cisco. I love that we have so much work to do on that object, and it's gotten a lot of visibility. We are on sales roadmaps now. We are a part of sales change management and communications. That's what we're working on now, being a part of their decks and a part of some of the things that they have coming out so that we can do enablement, because there's a lot of enablement that has to happen because the things that we're launching is going to be visible to gobs of people soon. So that's what we're working on now. And it's just opening up a can of worms, because I think this is going to segue into a lot of their cleansing work that we can do and automation that we can do within our CRM.
It sounds like you have like a real true partnership between yourself and the sales team and the sales ops team, that there's also a lot of trust there, which is I think so important when it comes to being able to make changes in systems and things like that and processes, that there's got to be a partnership and a trust level there. And it's really incredible that you've been able to build that level of trust, because that's very, very rare. I'm telling you. Now, as you are now the owner of campaigns and campaign members, how has that helped you manage the data and create a better data environment within Cisco?
It's helped, because now we are going to have cleaner data coming from our CRM, and that opens a lot of doors, because that CRM integrates with every tool that we use. So our data is going to be enhanced, our metadata is going to be enriched, and that means that we're going to have a better partnership with our analytics team. Our campaign orchestration team is going to be happier. We think that things are going to be more efficient. I think our customer journeys are going to be a little bit more solid. Our attribution practices are going to be better. So we think this is a lot of opportunities on the horizon from doing this. So I'm really excited. I'm already starting to see a sample of the data, because we've already launched a lot of things in lower environments. And this new data that we're unlocking, it's the same standard fields that have already been there, but the data wasn't populating before. But now that it's populating, I'm getting the ability to see a sample of it. We're starting to have meetings and workshops with our analytics team and some of our channel subject matter experts. They're coming up. I think they're going to be very excited about what they see. It's things that they've been asking for a very long time.
And then how has that impacted the work that you're doing with Marketo Measure?
Well, what I foresee is that relaunch, and especially if we move over to Ultimate soon, that relaunch is going to be probably one of the best that I've done. It's going to be easier. I think that this is not necessarily a prerequisite. This is not something Adobe is going to tell you have to do before you use Marketo Measure. But this is something that will make your Marketo Measure launch a tremendous success. If you have your tagging and tracking in order, if you have your CRM and especially your campaign object aligned, and you have your buying committee somehow, identified, the system of record that's going to house your buying committee. You have these things identified, and you know what these things are, and you're going to go and launch Marketo Measure, you're on the right track. If you don't know what any of this is and you're launching Marketo Measure, it's going to take you a little bit longer it's just going to be a longer learning curve for you to get insights out of a tool like that, if any of what I just said is foreign.
Yeah. Now, you also mentioned that with this work that you're doing with campaigns, campaign members, you're better able to answer questions that are coming from your channel partners. What are the types of questions that your channel partners are asking? Is it just the traditional what's working and what's not, or are they asking like more complex questions?
They are asking more complex questions now because we have gotten sophisticated. So they do want to know, how many touch points does it take to really close a deal? They do want to know at the beginning stages of a journey, what are people engaging with versus right before a deal is closed versus in the middle. Where in the journey are people looking at X, Y, and Z? Where in the journey do people want webinars? So we're getting very detailed questions, and we should be able to definitely answer that. There are also operational questions that we get asked. We get asked questions at what point do we lose members of the buying committee? Where are they getting lost at? Because that was a thing where some of our buying committee gets lost at various points of our site in various forms. They may have put some information in that our site doesn't like, our forms don't like, or our CRM is not familiar with. And if you do that, you will not, with the rest of the committee, you will get stuck. So we're able to use this data. We were able to use Marketo Measure data to show points in the funnel that were leaking and points in the funnel that were working and not working, and be able to disseminate that information to individuals who needed it.
Okay. I love looking for leaks in the funnel. That is one of the most impactful things that you can find when you start getting into this data is, where do people drop out of the buying process? Super important to find those things. So let's talk a little bit about what the future looks like, because you've talked about Marketo Measure Ultimate a little bit, which is a new product that Adobe's rolling out, or has already rolled out. It's been out for over a year now. But let's look into the future. Where do you think the profession of marketing data and analytics is headed?
Well, we know AI. AI is going to be on top of everything that you can think of marketing and data folks. I think the insights that we get from a chart, from a dashboard, from a journey, cluster analysis, anything that we do with data and analytics is going to be enhanced by artificial intelligence for sure. I'm already seeing it. It's impressive. And I think taking that information and adding it with a data scientist, an analyst, a marketing operations specialist, anyone in that field will benefit us, because that can make us faster, it can make us stronger. I don't think we should reject it. I think we should use AI to augment our suggestions, and we should use it to help to simplify anything that we're doing and that we're handing out. I also like where AI is being used to cluster the website into themes, to cluster the website into campaigns. I'm seeing AI used in interesting ways I didn't think about before. So if you want to inventory your entire website and group it using AI, I'm seeing where people are doing that, and some people are mentioning that at the company. And I never thought of that in an analytics way, but if you're using AI to take the entire site and to group it and to theme it, you can take those themes and layer that with your data and analysis and see if it tells stories. So I appreciate where it's going. And I'm definitely on that road. I'm not going to let the AI pass me by. I'm not an AI rejecter at all.
Now, I love that idea of using AI to categorize and theme different portions of the website. I hadn't really heard that one before, so I love that idea, though. That's great. And what do you think is for marketing attribution specifically and marketing data specifically? What do you think the future looks like?
I think we're gradually clearing all the fog around attribution. It's happening. I think we're getting more accurate with marketing attribution. I think AI will help us get more accurate, but I think marketers are able to get more accurate. Attribution is not a word that people never heard of anymore. I'm starting to recognize marketers understand what it means. They get where we are. I recently contributed to a Gartner article, and that research, it emphasized the importance of educating marketers. And I mentioned something in that article that I mentioned to you about educating marketing teams on the benefits and the methodologies of multi-touch attribution. And I still think that's a major focus in the future. It's going to be continuously educating them, because it's not only taking a customer's touch and seeing how that touch contributes to the overall ending dollar amount, but it's taking these touches and it's taking these activities from each of the different channels and understanding what channel is efficient at doing what it does. Because some of our channels are more efficient at bringing people to a brand, and then another channel might be more efficient at getting people to do something different, like watch a webinar. Then there could be another channel that could be efficient to actually getting the deal closed. So it's just better understanding, using, touch points to better understand what your channels are good at doing. And that is another form of attribution. So just learning what we're talking about here when we're saying attribution, because it's not as linear as just taking a set of touch points and saying how they contribute to a dollar. We have to look at it a little bit more broad. And I think we are getting there. But just to refine this a little bit more, we are gradually clearing the fog around attribution. And I think we're getting a little bit more accurate with our ability to do so. Tools are coming out to do that, and I'm seeing it, and I'm appreciating it.
I would agree with that. Yeah, I think clearing the fog around attribution is one of the biggest, most important things we can do, because there are clear benefits to doing multi-touch attribution. We just got to help people understand what those are. So what's next for Cy in your journey of attribution and data and analytics in the B2B world? Like, what are some of the next things that you're personally working on?
I see myself continuing down the path of marketing and sales alignment and marketing sales tools. So there's a lot of opportunities with making sure that we continue to work together and collaborate. And I have quite a few projects that I'd love to do. There are ways that I can enhance some of the sales-owned objects and fields and attributes in a way that I think can help earn the company a lot of money. So I'm positioning myself in a way to pitch some of the things that I've seen. It's I just have to get a little tiger team with me that believes in some of the things that I have been working on the side. So I want to work on some of these projects, get some leadership buy-in on them, and start to pitch this to sales to see if they want us to augment some of what they have going on with a few of the things that I've found. So sales and marketing alignment, and going through and cleansing and changing the way they use some of their tools, I think, is where I see myself headed right now. And just a little bit more on refining the customer journey and the way that I explain that, and more of the customer journey and customer pathway analysis to help out marketing operations so that they could realign the site or reorchestrate the site in a way that makes the customer journey as simple as it needs to be, because there are probably some areas where we could make the journey shorter than it is. So I do want to get some of those opportunities in front of our marketing ops leaders.
Well, it sounds like you're fantastic at building relationships and creating partnerships between marketing and sales. So I'm sure you're going to be able to do that. I have no doubt you'll be super successful with that. So one last thing here, we're getting close to the end of time here. So I always like to add a little bit of humanity to these conversations. And personally, I'm a huge fan of music. I love music. I love hearing what other people are listening to. So what music are you listening to right now? Artists, bands, genres? Like what's on your playlist?
Yeah, it depends on the setting. So I love Sade. I've always loved Sade. And then my husband's Jamaican, so I always have some Bob playing because of him. So I've grown a love for Bob, his entire playlist, whatever it is. I just let it, like, easy listening in the background. And then the funniest thing, so at night when I'm not listening to like white noise, I'm listening to like bamboo flute music. So I actually crave that at night. And then I have a friend that's a drummer. So I do like to listen to just jazz and I like blues. And we do go to live jazz shows quite frequently every other week. So live jazz, anything live too, I'll try to go to it. So if it's 70s or 80s music and it's live, I'm definitely down.
Awesome. Awesome. I can imagine that bamboo flute music is like super relaxing. I'm sure that's just like a really nice way to just like wind down at the end of the day. I love that. I love that. Okay. So what I want to do is I want to move over to some key takeaways. Some of the things that I heard during during our conversation here today that I think I want to just call out to the audience here. So first off, there's a theme that's kind of become pretty apparent to me throughout listening to you. And that theme of that interview is don't be scared. Don't be scared to change industries. Don't be scared to learn new technology. Don't be scared to adopt AI. Don't be scared to connect with counterparts and create trust and partnerships. That's something that I've heard from you throughout this entire interview. Another thing is about storytelling and educating. You mentioned storytelling multiple times throughout this interview. For example, when you relaunched Marketo Measure, you had to demystify the technology by starting with the end in mind and then breaking things down into analogies and helping people understand what they're going to get at the end. And you have to tell a story to do that. And that also comes through in seeing yourself as the voice of the customer. That's you're helping the customer tell their story. The other thing that you mentioned multiple times here is using empathy to learn new things, using empathy to learn new technology, to get advocates behind you, to get your initiatives moving forward, building those cross-functional teams and partnerships and building trust, empathy, super important to that as well. And then sometimes you need to success in a tool like Marketo Measure is not dependent upon Marketo Measure. It's dependent upon other things like the source data, like the campaigns and the CRM. You couldn't get Marketo Measure to work if you didn't take over ownership of campaigns and campaign members and wrangle that. So you don't, in order to optimize a system like Marketo Measure, it's not necessarily that system that you're optimizing. It might be other things as well. Another one was when you're analyzing data, you've got to check your bias. You cannot be biased about what you think should be happening. You cannot be biased about, what's right and what's wrong. You just have to let the data tell its story, going back to storytelling again. And then the last thing is, there's points in the funnel where you can find leaks. I mean, that's one of the most important things that you can find when you're talking about what's working and what's not working. It's understanding where people are opting out of buying your product. Where does that happen? Where are they opting out of your application? Whether it's a game application or buying $1 million, Cisco hardware solution, people opt out. And it's important to understand how, where, and why they do. All right, so Sai, I want to ask another question. It's a little bit more personal in nature. You are an African-American woman that works in an industry that looks a lot like me, white guy. And I just want to ask you what your experience has been, and if there's anything that you can share about your experience that might help others that are also in a similar situation as a minority in an industry that it doesn't have a lot of representation.
I encountered challenges a lot when I was in person working, and it was earlier on in my career. And one of the things that I had to do was start to understand my strengths a lot stronger. So like Strength Finders 2.0, using standout assessments, emotional intelligence, getting mentors. So mentorships helped me, and humbly becoming a mentee really, really helped. And involving myself in that mentor-mentee relationship helped me so much. So that when I came into B2C, from B2C to B2B, and I became remote, where I didn't have those relationships that I did have when I was in B2C and in person, I was already equipped and I was already ready later in my career. So I'm saying that to say I learned to couple my background, my upbringing, and my strengths to pivot in my career and to add to my projects and my teams. So one of the examples you summarized so well this podcast, and you put my words so well into the story. My storytelling came from my mother, and it came from her ability. She's a builder and she's a realtor. She's been a realtor for decades. But a single mom that, remarried 3 times, that's a part of my background. And if you take that and you embrace that and you understand that I'm an African American woman who was a product of a teenage mother that, remarried several times, but I learned from her the ability to storytell and to sell. She's an amazing realtor and an amazing home builder. So those types of things bring diversity and strength, and it brings a lot to a project and to a team. So I focused on my diversity and my strengths together for the positive goal of the company. And when you focus on that, you're not focused on the seeming adversity you face, right? So I don't focus on the door I felt like was shut, or I don't focus on someone I felt was rude to me. I rather just take that energy and focus on what have I learned in my life? What have I gone through? Couple that with my strengths, and how do I get us to the end goal? How do I get this company more money, or how do I get myself more money at the same time with whatever I've gone through? That could be a little bit different than anybody else in the room, and bring that to the table. And that has helped me go far, because a lot of the challenges and the adversities that people face, they're a distraction, and they don't help anyone, right? So you can choose to focus your time on that, or you can choose to focus your time on something else. And I just chose to focus on coupling my background with my strength.
I love that. I think that one of the things that other folks in this podcast series have mentioned is doing things differently and than your competitors. And you can't do things differently if you have the same people in your organization that think the same way, that have the same backgrounds. You just can't. And so I think that's one of the big benefits of diversity in the workforce, is just different ways of thinking and coming up with different ideas. So thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely.
So Sy, thank you so much for your time. I think listeners are going to learn a lot from this episode. So really, thank you so much for joining Attribution Nation today. And looking forward to just maintaining a relationship with you in the future.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
On our next episode, we'll talk to someone who started doing email program analysis for Walgreens and then moved over to the dark side, B2B, and has had a lot of experience advocating for the right MarTech investment. She's Kimberly Gallitz, currently at F5, and it's a can't miss episode in my opinion.